built, sold, and put out the door 1 million epicenters, which is pretty incredible. So anyway, with that, let's get started. So today we're talking Epicenter LE, the limited edition. Let's get into it, guys. So first thing I always like to bring up in these trainings is just a little bit about audio control. We're gonna talk a little bit of history today too. But why audio control? Why us? Why support a brand like us? Why use audio control? One of those reasons is just we've been around a long time. Audio control's been around over 43 years, making good sound great. We are a US company. We are based here in the Great Pacific Northwest in Washington State, and do things a little bit differently than everybody else. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but some of those too are just, some of the things like our support, industry leading support, myself, Chris Bennett, some of the things that we do online, these trainings, right? All of this stuff is part of our support for you dealers and reps out there and consumers as well. We are not a company that just makes products and then hides away. We're a very available company, and we are those guys that want to be out there and want to be involved and basically interacting with the people that are actually using our products. I think a good piece of that too is how we kind of take feedback from people too and actually incorporate that in. And if you paid attention in the last couple of years to the products that we've come out with, most of them are driven by consumer suggestions, rep suggestions, dealer suggestions, things like that. So we really do pay attention and listen, and that's a huge part of it. Our warranty too, 5-year warranty across the board on audio control products when they're installed by an authorized retailer or dealer, I should say. As long as they're put in by a qualified professional, basically 5-year warranty is, bar none the best warranty out there. Nobody's got a 5-year warranty on products like we do. So it really says a lot to how we stand behind our products. And that's because we are a US manufacturer. Like I mentioned, we're here in Washington State in Mount Lake Terrace, which is just north of Seattle. And we actually design, engineer, in a lot of cases, build, assemble these products, test these products, program these products here in Washington, here in the US, which, everybody always says, well, that's really cool, but I don't think they really grasp how big of a deal that really is. If you are part of this industry, you probably know, but not all consumers do. Most things these days do not happen here in the US. Most companies' products come from overseas, get a label slapped on them and call it a day. If they had any say in the engineering process at all, that's one step above, but a lot of companies don't even have that. They're basically taking off the shelf products and then just putting their name on it. And so for us to actually be a, engineering company and have engineers here in the building designing these products and testing these products and having everything from us with a DSP in it, getting tested and listened to by a real person here in-house is so cool. It's a really unique thing, and it's something that I'm really proud of. It's something that makes us proud to be a part of audio control and work here too. Another thing that I think I'm proud of as a company, and I think sets us apart a little bit, is that when we talk about amplifiers, which is not today's topic, but when we talk amplifiers, we only deal with real RMS power ratings. We are not those guys who are going to stamp 2,400 watts on an 800 watt amplifier like most companies do. We're just going to call it what it is. If it delivers 800 watts at 2 ohms, then it's an 800 watt amplifier. I don't know why that's so complicated and hard for so many companies to grasp. Everybody's got wrapped up in these marketing numbers, these hyped up peak power and things like that. And we just don't play that game. We're going to call things what they are. And if they're a 300 watt amp, then it's a 300 watt amp. It's not a 900 watt amp, because it can deliver 900 watts for 1 millisecond on a certain bass note or something like that. So, that's just speaking to some of the things that make audio control a little bit different. But I did also want to touch on a little bit of the history today, and I think this is actually one of the really fun parts. I love kind of the history of the company. I think that stuff's fun and kind of interesting. And some of my background personally is in kind of the pro sound world and doing pro sound and stage lighting and DJ work and things like that. And so to find out that audio control was founded in 1977 by Greg Mackey is pretty interesting to me. A lot of you guys might be familiar with Mackey products. Maybe you've seen a Mackey mixing board at a concert, or Mackey monitors in a studio, or Mackey speakers at a wedding or something like that. And Greg Mackey was the guy that actually formed audio control back in the 70s, which is pretty cool. So AudioControl's had, a few different owners and things throughout the years. Alex Camara is our CEO these days, and leading the company with all these cool new products and things that we're doing today. So back in the 70s, AudioControl was founded, and what they found was that there was a issue, with home audio where, when they were mixing the sound in the studio, when they're recording these records, right? So artists go into the studio, they sit down to do a session, and they're going to record this album. When it would actually get recorded, a lot of times they would mix the bass out of the recording, because what they found was that in most people's home hi-fi setups, it would make the needle skip if there was too much bass. And so a lot of people don't know that that's actually where kind of the Epicenter got its legs. It was actually started and created because of that problem. It was a home audio problem. Because you got to remember, back then in the 70s and 80s, everybody had these big wooden consoles that were, almost the size of this table that I'm sitting at, that were like a piece of furniture in your living room. And that was your hi-fi, that was your stereo. And it was usually a turntable and a radio tuner and a couple of speakers kind of built into its big wooden, cabinet of furniture. But because it was all one piece, if those speakers were playing a lot of bass, it would make the needle skip on the record. And obviously that's not going to produce great results. So what they started doing was actually mixing the bass out of the recordings a little bit. So they were kind of mixing that out to get rid of this problem. Okay, makes sense. But then you have the hi-fi enthusiasts at home who actually want that bass, right? Maybe they have separate components. Maybe they have a shelf with all their components and their speakers are separate, like a traditional, 2-channel hi-fi system you would maybe think of today. Those guys are going to want that bass, right? They're going to want that back because they want to hear it. They want to hear it the way that it was intended. And so AudioControl developed the phase coupled activator in 1985. And this was actually kind of the first incarnation of the Epicenter, but this was the home audio version. This was a little product with wood pieces down the side. It was a very 70s, 80s looking piece of technology. And basically what it did is pretty much what an Epicenter does. It looks at the signal coming in, sees what the lowest bass note present is, and puts bass in 1 octave below. And we're going to talk more about how the Epicenter works here in a minute, but that's essentially how the phase couple activator worked back in the 80s. It was putting bass back into those recordings that was mixed out of those records, and enthusiasts were thrilled. People loved it. It was giving them that sound that they always wanted, now that they had spent the money on these great speakers and amplifiers and turntables and all these things for their home audio setup. So then somebody decided, you know what, that would work really well in a car. And so the first Epicenter came out in 1987, is when the first Epicenter was released. And that was the first incarnation of it in the car. And I think I actually have a pretty old version of it. Well, this isn't quite that old, but here's a classic looking version from probably back in the 90s or early 2000s in the Sierra white that people love so much. And by the way, the white and the black sound exactly the same. Let me just dispel that rumor real quick. Anybody out there going, yeah, the white one sounds better. The white and the black one sound exactly the same. The white and the gray one sound exactly the same. You can believe whatever you like, but they are the same in fact. So anyway, so the first Epicenter was in 1987. And then throughout the years, we also released something called the Epicenter In-Dash, or the Epic 150. This was the Epicenter half-DIN chassis. We'll take a look at that in just a moment too. And this was released in the early 2000s. Perfect timing for a product like that, right? Right in those Fast and the Furious days when everybody's all about big showy audio and fiberglass waterfalls of speakers and amplifiers. What better product to release than an in-dash SPL meter so that you can show off to your friends? What a great idea. So then in August of this year, we actually rolled out the 1 millionth Epicenter. And that is incredible for any product, not just in car audio, but think about that. Any product to sell 1 million of them is absolutely wild. But especially in car audio, I think that's just blows my mind. You think about anything, I mean, especially in the electronics world though, and let alone car audio. I mean, I don't think they hardly make 1 million of anything unless you're talking maybe an iPhone or iPods or things like that. But to make 1 million Epicenters really says something about how popular they are and what fanfare there is for these products and how much people love them. And we talk to people at trade shows and conferences and things all the time, and they'll come up and tell us, hey, I've had an Epicenter. I've had 5 Epicenters. I've had an Epicenter in every one of my vehicles for the last 10 years, 20 years, since I was a kid, whatever it is. And we love to hear those stories. They're just so much fun. And so, yeah, to commemorate the 1 millionth Epicenter rolling off the assembly line in August, we decided that we should do a commemorative special edition. So we came up with the idea of doing the Epicenter limited edition. And so that's where this guy comes in. So fall of 2021, Epicenter limited edition will start shipping here in the next, you know, I don't know, maybe month or two, something like that. And as you can see, I've got some real samples here. These are finished products. These are not prototypes. And we're going to kind of dive in and show you the dirty details and show you everything that makes these special and what makes this the limited edition. What makes this any different than a regular Epicenter? So before we get into that, though, I do want to talk a little bit too just about the Epicenters in general and what the differences are and kind of what all the different models and things like that are. So you know, in the past, we've had a few different things, so I just wanted to touch on them. We have the Epicenter Concert Series, which is your traditional kind of trunk mount Epicenter, or I say trunk mount, I guess it could go under a seat or wherever, but traditionally I think of it as going into the trunk. So the Concert Series is going to be, you know, your traditional OG Epicenter, and these came in the Sierra White. In the past, they had also come in a gray, kind of a salmon gray color, I think we called it, and then they also came in this black design here. Now, to be clear, just because we are doing a Epicenter limited edition does not mean that these are going away. Okay, these are not going anywhere. Those of you that still want just the traditional OG Concert Series Epicenter, there is nothing wrong with that, and they are still available. We are still going to be making them. The limited edition does not replace the Concert Series. These are going to be continuing production. Don't worry, we're not stopped making the Epicenter Concert Series. These guys will keep going. Excuse me. So we've had those in black and white now for a while. They are continued to be offered in black and white. In the past, we did also offer something called the Epicenter Plus. The Epicenter Plus was a little bit different. This guy had the high level inputs on here. So let me get a quick close up here. So this one, you not only had your RCA in and out, you also had high level input, and oddly enough, an aux input. So interesting design. You'll also notice that the Epicenter Plus does not have any sort of wide and sweep controls. This one is actually a fixed setting on this guy, and we're going to talk about wide and sweep a little bit more here in a minute. So we've had the Epicenter Plus in the past. This was kind of our idea for an Epicenter with OEM integration options built into it. The Epicenter Plus has been discontinued for a while now because we have some really cool stuff to talk about a little later too that kind of replaces that and gives you some great new options for cars in the future and some of these OEM integration challenges that you guys run into. So, so currently you've got your Epicenter Concert Series in black and white. And we also do still offer the Epicenter In-Dash, which you can see on your screen there. So at this point, we call it the Epicenter In-Dash. It's not the Epic 150 or Epic 160 like maybe it was in the past. It does, in fact, read up to 160 decibels, though, on that built-in SPL meter. It's actually a very fun product. It is basically a Epicenter Concert Series, but in a half-DIN chassis and with a SPL meter built into the face of it and a voltage meter. So if you or one of your customers is you know, doing one of those kinds of builds where maybe you want to have something in there that's a little bit showy or something that's kind of fun to show off to your friends, the In-Dash is a really cool piece, and that's something we still offer as well. So with the Epicenter 2, you know, one of the really common things that I always touch on, and I swear almost every training, but I think it just needs to be drilled down on because I still get questions on it every single day, is the difference between the Epicenter and Accubase. Because still to this day, so many customers, so many guys online, even some of the shops I stop into are just not clear on what the difference is. So let's just quickly touch on that. For those of you that have heard me go over this a million times, I'm sorry, but it does still have to be talked about because we still get questions on it all the time. So, so the difference between the Epicenter and Accubase. The Epicenter, the way that the Epicenter works is it's actually looking at what the incoming signal is. It's analyzing what the lowest present bass note is, and then putting bass in 1 octave below. Okay, so if just like that graph on your screen right now off to the left hand side, if the lowest bass that's present in the song you're listening to is only down to 60 hertz, that's the lowest bass that's in the song, 60 hertz. So kind of a punch you in the chest type bass, right? If that's the lowest bass that's there and you feed that signal through an Epicenter is going to look at that, see that that's the lowest octave there, and put bass in 1 octave below. okay? The lowest harmonic there, I should say. It's going to put bass in 1 octave below. So now you're going to have bass down to 30 hertz, which is pretty awesome. So now you've got a system that previously only kind of had that punchy upper bass and now has that great, kind of feel it in your gut, shake the whole vehicle type bass. And of course, that's adjustable by the ACR one that comes with your Epicenter, which is your dash control knob. So you're going to have the ability to change how much of that Epicenter effect from song to song. With Accubase, on the other hand, Accubase is different. It is a feature, it's not a product. So you're not going to go into a store and buy Accubase. You're going to buy a product with Accubase, maybe, like maybe a LC2i or 2i Pro, something like that. But you're not going to go in and just ask for Accubase. You could go in and ask for an Epicenter and buy one of those, but you're not just going to walk in and buy Accubase. So Accubase is built into products, and the purpose of Accubase is actually to help correct when bass was taken away by factory radios, factory processing, things like that. So if you've got one of these vehicles where, as you increase volume, the vehicle actually turns down the bass at the same time, or as you increase volume, the bass plateaus at a certain level, that's a vehicle that needs Accubase. And I think we probably all experienced this, even if you didn't know it, even if you didn't know you needed Accubase, you probably did. And here's what I mean. If you've ever set up a system, you added an amp and sub, you kept the factory radio in a vehicle, and when you were all done, what you ended up with was, no matter how you tuned this thing, you just couldn't quite get it to be perfect. Like, you turned up the radio to 3/4 volume and you tried to set your gains and crossovers and all that on the amplifier. But no matter what you do, it just seems like at 3/4 volume, there just wasn't enough bass. It just didn't sound right, okay? But at low volume, when you turn that factory radio down, there was just way too much bass. It was just booming at low volume. That is a vehicle that needed Accubase. That vehicle could have been fixed by putting in a LC2i, an LC2i Pro, an LC7i, one of our DSPs, one of our amplifiers. There's a lot of products that we have that have Accubase built into them, and Accubase could have fixed that car. It could have made that car sound like there was an aftermarket radio. Because what Accubase is actually going to do is it's going to take, if you set it up correctly, it's going to take the point at which the bass rolls off, okay? So whatever that point in the volume is, and it's going to apply a bass boost from that point on. And that way, let's say our volume goes from 0 to 100, but at volume 70, the bass rolls off or stays the same. Accubase is going to fill in from volume 70 to volume 100. It's going to fill in that gap so that the bass does continue to get louder with the volume the way that we expect it to, like as if the car had an aftermarket radio in there. So that's the difference between Epicenter and Accubase. The way that I kind of remember it is that Accubase is actually putting it back in when it was stolen or taken away by a factory radio, and the Epicenter is putting bass in where there was none. Okay, there was never any bass to begin with for whatever reason, and we're going to talk about a couple of those reasons here in a second. So the difference, between them and kind of when to use them and that sort of thing, I think you guys probably understand that. The common thing that I get to when I'm traveling around and I'm talking about Epicenters with dealers is they all understand, that there are a stereotypical set of situations where the Epicenter is a great application. Most guys bring up a couple of ideas. They bring up the idea of the customer's taste in music. That's why I sell Epicenters. I sell Epicenters to my customers that listen to classic rock. I sell Epicenters to my customers that listen to any sort of banda music, Hispanic music, anything like that that just doesn't have a lot of bass to begin with. And that's not wrong. Those aren't bad reasons to sell an Epicenter. Those are great reasons to sell an Epicenter, and they're perfect applications for it, okay? However, there are lots more reasons to use and sell Epicenters that will make you successful than just that. If that's the only reason you sell Epicenters currently, pay attention, because you could be doing so much better with them. So with Epicenters, there's a couple more things that, especially today, are going to make a lot of sense now and in your near future. And one of those is the source material. So a lot of your customers are listening to their music from all sorts of different sources. They're using CarPlay, okay, great. They're using Pandora, they're using Spotify, they're using YouTube, they're streaming from whatever radio service, whatever their source of choice is. But depending on what that source is, sometimes that music is super compressed and loses a lot of that fidelity and a lot of that information. So you remember, back in the early 2000s when everybody was downloading music illegally or putting music on their iPods and things like that. And one of the first things a lot of guys that were, maybe not audiophiles, but had a keen ear and had a nice sound system noticed was these MP3s just don't quite sound the same. Like, they sound good on headphones, but when you listen to them through a nice sound system in your car, it's just not quite the same. Well, that's still true today. It's just a little bit different. Now we're probably not ripping music off of Napster and putting it onto our iPod Shuffle or whatever. But you know, even now, streaming music from a lot of these services, that music is compressed. And when they compress it, a lot of times you lose some of that real low bass information. And that's where the Epicenter comes in with fixing that for you and getting some of that back. The other thing with that is, you know, if they're just pulling music straight off of like YouTube, let's say they don't subscribe to any sort of paid or premium YouTube, they're just playing music videos or things like that. A lot of that music quality is not great, and the Epicenter can help fill that in too. My favorite one to suggest is satellite radio. If you or your customer listens to satellite, loves Sirius XM, that's great. Sirius XM is awesome. It's super convenient. You have all those channels. That's great. However, SiriusXM is missing a lot of that low bass information from a lot of their channels. You know, Sirius, to fit that many channels and things on that satellite, there has to be some compromise there. And part of that is, you know, I think bandwidth with the resolution of the music and what they do to make it fit in those channels is something has to give, right? Something has to go. And part of that is the real low bass, and the Epicenter can bring that back. Now, I suggest this all the time to guys that, hey, if you listen to satellite or your customer listens to satellite, throw an Epicenter in there, turn the knob up a sixth or an 18th of the way, or an eighth of the way, I should say, and see how big of a difference it makes. And I suggest this all the time, but I did suggest this to one of our sales reps maybe a month or so ago, and he called me like 2 weeks later and says, you know, Matt, I tried it, and I got to tell you, I never thought I would have an Epicenter in my car, but I listen to satellite all day, every day, and what a difference it makes. Like, he was blown away by what a huge difference it made. And so it's fun to hear those stories from guys, though, where they're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm an Epicenter customer. Like, you know, I listen to hip hop and I listen to electronic and I listen to stuff that already has plenty of bass. Well, that's fine, but where is that music coming from, and could it still be better is really the question. Now, the last one that I'm going to bring up before we get into the specifics of the Epicenter LE are certain vehicles these days. Now, we're starting to run into lots of different cars that are starting to see more of a permanent bass roll off rather than a volume controlled bass roll off, like when we talked about Accubase. So what we're starting to see is, I've seen it most commonly in Hyundais, Kias, Hondas, Acuras, Range Rover, Land Rover, Jaguar, Volvo. All of those vehicles seem to be the ones that really are prominent with this, but I can promise you, you're going to start to see it in even more applications. I've had some dealers report to me that in some of the newer GM vehicles, they've seen this. Take that with a grain of salt, but that's what I'm just hearing from people in the field. So what we're starting to see, though, is that we're seeing vehicles that just don't have any bass to begin with at any volume. And it doesn't matter if it's aux in, Bluetooth, USB, radio, CD, whatever, CarPlay even. It seems to be that these vehicles are just permanently high passed. And so it doesn't matter what you do with that car. The screenshot that you're seeing on your screen right now is from a Honda Accord. I think this is a 2018 base model. So this just had the screen in the dash, 4 small speakers. That's about it. So in that vehicle, that car, as you can see on that RTA, really doesn't have much of anything below about 70 hertz. So there's nothing there. I mean, you can put in 15-inch woofers and thousands of watts of power, but what's it playing? It's just playing basically from 70 and up. And if you cross over your woofers like most of us do at maybe 70, 80, 90 hertz, what's that woofer really working with? So now we're sending that woofer basically from 90 to 70, and everything else is steeply rolled off. It's not a lot of information for that woofer to play at that point. So how good could it possibly be, right? And that's really where an Epicenter could really help that vehicle, is filling in that gap. So this vehicle that only had bass down to maybe 70 hertz now has bass down to 35 hertz. So now this car, even with whatever woofers you put in there, wasn't really sounding that great. Now it's got that great low bass that it was missing. And that's something that I see from a lot of retailers out there when I stop into their stores, is they'll say, oh yeah, we had this car, you know, last week or 2 weeks ago that we just couldn't figure out, and there just didn't seem to be any bass. and they'll try all sorts of things. They'll try an EQ, they'll try a line driver, they'll try a DSP, they'll try all sorts of stuff. They'll try Accubase, they'll try all sorts of things to try to fix that car. But the problem is that even with the world's best DSP, you're DSPing nothing, right? I mean, you're getting that signal in and you're taking the 31 band EQ in your DSP and you're trying to boost all of the frequencies down in those lower bass notes. But what's there to boost? There's no signal to boost, right? You're basically boosting nothingness. And so that's really where all the DSP and EQ and things in the world are not going to fix those cars. What will fix those cars is an Epicenter. So if you put an Epicenter into those types of vehicles, I promise you the results are absolutely staggering compared to not having one in there. It is a world of difference. Now, I'm not saying the Epicenter has to be turned up all the way and that you need to make that car crazy, but even if you're just putting in a single 10-inch woofer, your customer is going to be disappointed in one of those vehicles we just talked about. That's just the way it is. So the Epicenter doesn't necessarily have to be sold as, hey, it's this bass enhancement device and you need it because of the type of music you listen to and this and that. It can absolutely be sold as just basically, hey, because of the type of car you drive, you need this. Okay, if you want this 10-inch woofer to perform like you heard it in my sound room, you need this product. And usually when you tell it to most consumers like that, they're going to understand at that point that, hey, if I want it to sound this way, this is the parts I need. It's just a part at that point. It doesn't have to be what you traditionally think of an Epicenter as. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
My 2 cents, I'm going to throw my 2 cents in on that.
Let's do it. Let's hear it.
Yeah, bass is something unique and cool in audio, right? Like most of why car audio today was foundationally built on adding bass to systems because bass has been anemic. And if you go back historically, everybody had 5-inch or 5 1/4 and 6.5-inch speakers. And that's the way cars were built and made. And, during the late 80s and 90s, the bass craze just kind of really drove that. And the Epicenter today is still relevant because it's a tool you can use to play with bass. It's to me, it's a toy to me. You know what I mean? It's when I want to get on it, this allows me to really get on it. When I want to really, when I'm in my car going to the airport and I just want to hammer and get the most out of my system, I think it's a great way just to have a tool where you can, create and play around with your bass response just to have some really magical moments, You muted yourself.
I definitely agree. Yep, I agree. The Epicenter is certainly a really fun piece to play with too. I mean, like Chris said, when you have it in there, if you've never experienced one, try one out. Music is so much more fun to listen to with this, and that's a really good point. So one of the things I want to talk about too is the controls on an Epicenter, because this is probably the most common question we get with Epicenters in general, and phone calls into tech support about the Epicenter. When I'm on the road, I was just in California for a week a couple weeks ago, and one of the most common things I got asked when we talked Epicenter was, what are those controls on top? What does wide and sweep mean? What is wide? What is sweep? What does any of this stuff mean, and how do I set it up? The biggest question I feel like is what's the right way to set it up? Now, the truth of it is, guys, to me, there is no right way, okay? The Epicenter is fun to listen to. It's kind of a toy, like Chris said, in a lot of instances. Sometimes it's necessary because of the car you drive or what have you, but in a lot of installs, it's more or less a toy. But there's really no right or wrong way to set up an Epicenter. If you look at the chart I have on your screen right now, the wide and sweep, the way that I think of these is sweep is kind of your center frequency, and wide is going to be, your Q factor, basically, if that makes it easier for you to understand. That's kind of the closest terms I can think of that would be used in other companies' jargon. But so basically what an Epicenter is looking at and what it can affect is from 27 to 63 Hertz, okay? So the sweep is going to say, where do we want to most affect, okay? Do we want to, affect closer to the really low bass down to 27? Do we want to affect the higher bass up towards 63? Or do we want to kind of be somewhere in the middle? So these products come with the knobs at 12 o'clock, and they come with them centered at 12 o'clock default for a reason, because they sound great at that setting. You can take an Epicenter out of the box, hook it up, plug it in, not touch the dials on it, and still have a great experience, whether that's for you or your customer if you're a pro watching this. And same thing with wide. The wide control, like I said, is kind of the cue or the width of the bell when you're looking at how we're affecting that bass, how we're affecting the frequencies that are passing through. So if we leave the sweep at 12 o'clock and we're basically centered at about 45 hertz, then is what the sweep setting is going to be at. And then we have the wide at about 12 o'clock. Well, we're going to be affecting a pretty wide range of frequencies. If we tone down that wide to its smallest setting, we're going to be affecting a smaller range of frequencies. So again, there's really no right answer or wrong answer to setting this up. And I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of people to understand is they go through and they call tech support or what have you. And they're like, well, there has to be a perfect way to set this up. It's really a matter of preference. You're going to have to listen to it a little bit and play with those and see what you like. But if nothing else, leave them at 12 o'clock and you really can't go wrong, at least to start. I would start with them there and you can always play with those dials later, but chances are you're probably not going to have to if you don't want to. So I always like to bring that up just because I think it's one of the most common things that we get asked. And I think it's funny that, you know, people just can't understand that there's no perfect answer to this. It is basically a matter of preference. So let's talk a little bit about the actual Epicenter LE. Let's talk about the limited edition. What makes this different? What makes this a limited edition? What makes this any different than a regular Epicenter? And one of the things that I want to talk about is just to kind of clear it up right off the bat, performance-wise, you guys, this is a traditional Epicenter, okay? This is a standard Epicenter as far as how it works and what it does. So when you look at the performance specs, when you look at the frequency response, when you look at the voltage and all those things, it's still a concert series Epicenter, okay? What we've done is some really fun cosmetic stuff. We've done some things to make it cool and different and special, and that's really what this is all about. It's just a limited edition. We didn't want to totally reinvent the wheel. We just wanted to give you guys something special to commemorate having built a million of these things, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah,
So
I remember, you know, just
go ahead.
Just so everybody knows, you know, we were going back. This is going back about 8 months ago, and we knew that, you know, once we got partially through February, that we were going to be making the 1 millionth Epicenter, you know, sometime during the summer, and it was just. You know, it's one of those moments, and amongst the COVIDness and not traveling, but at the same time, the you know, all the shortages had already been started. We were in the midst of fighting like heck to get parts and everything else. So, you know, this is one that really could have been swept under the rug. You know, it was like, yeah, do we really want to spend time trying to make something unique and celebrate this? And this has absolutely nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with you guys, our customers, our fans, the guys who do call us and go, oh yeah, I've had 5 or 6 Epicenters, or I've had this one Epicenter in 5 or 6 different cars. Can you guys look at it or whatever? This is only a celebration of you guys and the support, and trying to get something unique for the guys who have had one and really have, you know, made an audible difference in their system because of it, and really cared. You know, with product shortages and everything else, I remember sending the email out to our team going, I'm thinking we should do something unique and different, you know, and I could almost, but when I clicked that, I just imagined all the engineering and all the production guys, and them just cringing like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? We don't need this right now. We can't keep up with current demand. You know, we've had other product development stuff on hold. And yeah, it was definitely, you know, that email, it was difficult to do, but we did it for you guys. So if you guys, you know, know or care to know, the Epicenter limited edition is $199. It's a $199 Epicenter. That's what, you know, most Epicenters traditionally have sold for, you know, for the last 30 years, really. We've never increased price. We've never decreased price. And so at $199, you can have something unique and special and limited edition to celebrate with us, you know. So all that to say, thank you guys. This is not something that we make, we're really benefiting from. You know, our margins are actually less than this on a regular Epicenter. So we built this just for you guys. This is our way to say thanks, and hopefully you guys that are getting your hands on them, you know, more than half of them are already sold. And so just thank you guys immensely for the support of an amazing product that is standing the test of time. And it's just, it's not something we needed to do. I just want to reiterate that. It's something we wanted to do for you guys. You know, we have rep teams that have sold 200,000 or 250,000 Epicenters, and they wanted this just as much because, you know, they want to do something nice for that customer that has been supporting them in audio control and their business for a long time. So very cool stuff, guys. We can't thank you enough just for supporting audio control, and this is just a way we're trying to give back. So get your hands on one. I think they're super cool. And I know I just totally derailed Matthew from whatever he was thinking, but I just think it's so important that everybody knows that this is not for us. This is for you guys. Like I said, sending that email was probably one of the least great moments of my career at Audio Control, because I knew what we were all dealing with as a team and trying to keep product and stuff like that. And
then we just piled it on by adding another product.
Yeah, but it is a celebration, and I'm going to let Matthew go over, you know, the details of that celebration. That is the Epicenter limited edition.
No, that was great. Thank you for adding that stuff, Chris, because that's absolutely the truth, and I think that needs to be said. So, so basically, guys, what you're going to get with an Epicenter LE, the first thing I want to mention is that these are 5,000 piece limited run. So we only made 5,000 of these. There is not 5,050. There is not 5,020. There is not 5,500, and we're hiding 500 of them just in case. There is 5,000 of them. That's it. So when they are gone, they're gone. This is not the Rolling Stones farewell tour where we're going to do 3 more runs. You know, they're going to be done. Once they're gone, that's it. So pretty cool stuff. So make sure, if you are interested in getting one of these, if you want one of these, make sure that you actually order one and get one with your name on it, because when they're gone, they're gone. So a couple of things that make these different, you can kind of see from the image on your screen right now. A couple of cool things. They are going to come with a letter of authenticity. Pretty excited about that. It's, you know, kind of just thanking you for, you know, being a part of our history and helping us commemorate this momentous occasion and all that good stuff. The product itself has this awesome black on black look, and the pictures just don't do it justice. No matter how good of pictures we try to take, and no matter how good of renderings we do, and how good we try to do this, they just don't do it any justice. Seeing them in person is so much different. And I'm going to grab a little camera here and I'll take you around and show you some of the stuff in a minute. But we did the black on black silk screen, the inside of it too. We wanted, when you guys take these covers off and you look inside your Epicenter, I wanted it to be different. I didn't want it to be the same PC board as everything else. Now, again, mechanically, electrically, audibly speaking, it is the same product, but we went with a really cool black PC board with a white silk screen, just as a little something different, something special compared to a regular Epicenter. So again, just something different. And then the same goes for the LEDs. We wanted to do something different from the normal Epicenter. So rather than our traditional orange flashing, we went with a really cool blue. And same with the power LED. It is also swapped to blue. And I'm going to light up one of these here in just a second. I'll show you. So that's the certificate of authenticity. Even this is done special. It's on a really cool black piece of paper with like a foil inlaid writing, or like a chrome almost. It feels really cool and special in your hands. You know, when you pull one of these out of the box and look at it, it feels like a limited edition. It feels special because it is. It's a really, really cool deal. So when we take a look at this, let me stop screen sharing here for a second, and I'm going to fire up my other camera, and let me take you to some of these products up close.
There's a question from Chico Boss on Facebook. How can I get one? And check with your local retailer first, just to see if they have them on pre-order. They will start shipping. I know Matthew said it would be a little bit, but we should be getting them out of production in the next week and a half or so. And since it's 5,000 pieces, while he's getting his camera angle changed and stuff like that, I'll say, since it is 5,000 pieces, and since we are manufacturing these, people ask if they can get a specific number, and I just want to address that right now. Sorry, that's not possible, because the only thing that is numbered is the silk screen, or it's not even, it's laser etched, the laser etching on the internal product. So even when you go to a retailer and you're like, ooh, you know, here's my $200, I want an Epicenter limited edition, and you go and grab it, it's not going to say on the outside which number it is. You're going to have to open it up, pull it out, and see which number you got. So those numbers could be, you know, anywhere in between. Matthew did actually tell a fib there a little bit ago. There is actually going to be 5,008. There are 8 of them that are going to be 000 prototypes, which Matthew gets one and I get one, and there's some other people who will be getting those, people who have supported and partnered with us for a long time.
There are 5,000 units for sale.
There are 5,000 for sale. That's correct.
There we go. There we go. Let me be specific.
So yeah, just check with your local retailer. Most all of our partners already have these on order. So I would say within 3 to 4 weeks time, they'll be landing in stores, and you'll easily be able to get your hands on one for, I would say, a couple months. Once they're in stores, I think the 5,000 pieces will last a couple of months at retail, and then that'll be it.
Perfect. Well, let's take a look at the actual packaging and stuff here too. So these do come in a limited edition box. It is very glossy, as you can see, so it's kind of hard to capture it on camera here, but it is a kind of like the product itself, all blacked out box. It's got a little letter on the back here from Alex, the CEO, and just some cool, sexy shots of the Epicenter LE itself. And then here is the product itself, all lit up with those beautiful blue LEDs. Camera doesn't really do it justice, but you can see that they are blue power LED. And then, like Chris was saying, everything on here that's white is actually not white. It is actually laser etched, and it looks really, really cool in person. Again, kind of hard to see. There's the individual numbering. You can see spike on there, and it's cool because it's a black on black, black silk screen on a black product. And unlike our usual black products where they are black powder coated, you know, the Epicenter is normally a powder coated black. I'll show you a traditional concert series here for comparison. So there's a regular concert series Epicenter. You can see it's kind of got that textured feel to it. That is a powder coating. This is a brushed aluminum black. So you can see my fingerprints on there, but it is a really cool look with that black silk screen. And then one of the other things that we thought was really pretty cool was that black PC board. So you can check that out too. Those blue LEDs, black board, that white silk screen. Now this does still have your PFM module in there that you can replace if you want to replace that. And then our unbalanced and balanced switches are in here as well as our ground isolation, if I can talk, isolation switches there. So not switch, jumper, I should say. So we'll talk a little bit about those too, since that's another common thing that we get asked is about those. And lastly is those base output jumpers. So there we go, get some focus there. You can see we have 2.5 volts, 5 volts, 7.5, and 10+ volts. So let's talk a little bit about those controls and what those things mean. Let me switch cameras here, since you probably don't want the super close up. So when we're talking about the insides of an Epicenter, we've got a couple of different things going on in there. let's start with that ground isolation switch. So with that ground isolation switch, this is going to be for any sort of noise issues that you might be having. Basically, you guys, what this does is allows you to switch between how you want the ground handled. Do you want the ground to, I should specify the ground that is coming into the actual, power and ground terminal. How do we want that handled? Do we want that to be kept separate from the audio system ground? That's going to be your ISO setting. Do we want that combined with the audio system ground? That's going to be your just ground setting. Or do we want it combined with some resistance? That's going to be your 200 ohm setting. So that's going to be the audio system and power system grounds combined through 200 ohms of resistance. So if you're having some sort of turn on pop, turn off pop, or a thump, I guess in this case, or a whining noise or a buzz or something like that, that's where you're going to try to get rid of that. If you've already, done your traditional troubleshooting, you're still having some sort of an issue, you can change that jumper, and a lot of times it'll get rid of whatever weird hum or buzz or something like that that you're having.
I think the other thing too, to remember that the way that we ship all of these now with modern systems, very, very infrequently are you ever going to have to get in there and move anything around. You have to remember that the Epicenter being a 30-year-old plus product, systems were not as easy to dial in as they used to be. Vehicles, electronics, everything else were still, had different ways of handling signal path and stuff like that. And so, those are there for some of those, older ways and thought processes of installing or engineering product, whether it was, amplifiers or what the source units had. I mean, you have to remember that, back when the Epicenter came out, most all cars were common ground cars, so that's why a lot of those things are still there. It's just carried over and useful when you actually need it. But 95% of the time in today's late model vehicles or modern equipment, the default settings on the interior of the board is going to be just fine.
Agreed. So let's also look at the base output, the jumpers right there. So you can see we've got 10 volt plus, 7.5, 5 volt, 2.5 volts. And basically what these are going to be, guys, is these are what you're going to want to match essentially to your amplifier. So if the amplifier that you're working with can only handle a maximum of, say, 6 volts of input, then we're not going to want to have the Epicenter set at 10 plus volts. Okay. The common misconception is that this is a line driver. And so if I feed in my head unit's 2 volt signal, I'm going to get, 13 volts of output out of this thing. So what we want to do is this is not a line driver. Okay. So keep that in mind. Think of the base output jumper as more of like a gate or a limiter is the best way to think of it. So think of it as, again, we want to match it to whatever the input of our amplifier is. So if our amp can only accept 6 volts of input, then let's make sure that that jumper is set at 5 volts. If it'll handle 10 volts, then maybe go to the 7.5 volt or 10 volt setting. But basically what you're doing is you're putting a cap on it. You're saying, okay, no matter how high I or my customer turns up that Epicenter effect knob, I don't want the output of this Epicenter to ever exceed blank. And that blank you want to fill in with that jumper. So that's the best way to think of that. I know a lot of guys look at this and they're like, oh, cool, I want the most out of it, I'm going to put it at 10 plus. Well, if your amplifier will only take in 2, 3, 4, 5 volts of input, you are going to overdrive the hell out of those inputs and potentially even cause damage to that amplifier, or just create a massive amount of distortion and end up smoking woofers or having other issues. So kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at these things. One of the other ones that I wanted to take a quick look at here too, and I'll switch cameras again so you can see it up close, is that balanced and unbalanced there. Let me get this focused. There we go. So that balanced and unbalanced, you'll notice right hand is shipped as balanced and left side is shipped as unbalanced. And this seems goofy to a lot of people, but this is actually what our engineering and tech department has deemed basically gives the most universal results, meaning we have the least amount of issues when they are shipped this way. They are the most compatible with what's out there. So when do we use balanced and when do we use unbalanced? It's going to depend a little bit on your source unit, or a lot of it on your source unit. Again, like Chris said, 99% of the time, you're going to leave them as is. You don't need to mess with those jumpers. The only time I would really start messing with those jumpers, and Chris can correct me on this if he has a different idea, is if you're getting some sort of an issue. If there seems to be some sort of an issue with noise, or we're not getting the output we're looking for, or having some sort of an issue there, then we can look at changing those. But 99% of the time, I don't think you're going to need to change them. Chris, would you agree?
I agree 1000%. And I remember somebody calling me up and just going, oh, hey, you guys, I opened it up and the default setting was like this. And so I went upstairs and spent some time with Chuck, one of the guys who's one of the engineers that's been with us for a long time and been part of all these designs and stuff like that. And so it turned into one of those hour-and-a-half conversations where I just got bombarded with information, and I don't remember much of any of it, because it was just like, sometimes, you can get educated by engineers, which most of the time is the case. And sometimes you can be so overwhelmed that you forgot what you're even asking. So it is the right for, like I said, 95% of the products. And maybe we should have him on a training at some point, so we could just talk about why we opted to go that way for, you guys can get the
I think
hour
that's going to be a
and
really long training. It's going to be a very long training.
Yep.
But the last thing that I wanted to talk about in there, guys, and this is another one of those questions that we get sometimes with like the tech support team, is going to be our PFM filter. So the PFM filter is this little guy right here. It's this little chip. And these, you'll notice, have little kind of connectors on either side of them. This is a removable piece. I can pluck that out of there and replace it with a different one if I wanted to. So PFM stands for perfect frequency match. And basically the way an Epicenter comes shipped is with a 33 hertz PFM. It's the way they've came shipped for a long time. They still come that way. They will basically continue to come that way for now. What a PFM is not a 100% filter or a gate or anything like that. And I think, again, that's one of those things that a lot of people don't understand. If they look at that and they go, oh, so it doesn't play anything below 33 hertz, I'm missing all this really low bass. And that's simply not true. The reason that we have a 33 hertz PFM in these is basically to protect the end user, because a lot of these Epicenters go into systems with vented enclosures. They go into systems where the woofers are in ported boxes. And the trick of that is that a lot of ported boxes, the vast majority anyway, are going to be tuned, that port is tuned to somewhere between 30 to 35 hertz. 32, 33 is really, really common. And what you'll see is if you play a woofer below the tuning frequency of the enclosure, you end up kind of unloading the woofer. The woofer unloads below tuning frequency, and that's a lot of times where we get blown up speakers. That's where we get burnt voice coils. That's where we get smoked woofers. And so AudioControl put a 33 hertz PFM in this to help protect these speakers and these subwoofers from having this issue, and hopefully just kind of gently roll off everything below 33. Now, that doesn't mean that if you play a song that has 20 hertz bass notes in it that you're not going to hear them. They're still going to be there, guys, okay? So don't think that just because you have an Epicenter and it has a 33 hertz PFM that, oh, it suddenly doesn't play anything below 33. It definitely does. Now, if you have an enclosure that's sealed, or you have a box that's tuned super, super low, and for whatever reason, you want yours to play even lower than this plays out of the box, you can order different PFM chips directly from AudioControl. They are on our website under the accessories section, and you can go in there and order down to a 15 hertz PFM if that's really what you want to do. So if you swap this to a PFM, we would not be limiting or rolling off anything until we get down to 15, and then we'd just be rolling off from 15 hertz and down. So if that's something you want to do with your Epicenter, you certainly can. I don't think for the vast majority of users it's anything that needs to happen, but again, we do get that question a fair bit, so I did want to address it here. So those blue LEDs in here, you saw those with the cover on there. Looks really, really good with those blue LEDs going. It's so cool to see that with that flashing instead of the traditional orange. Makes for a really fun, cool special edition. Can't wait to start seeing these in some of these guys' installs and see them in some of these cars. It is still going to come with your traditional ACR1, your epicenter control knob. So that'll be the piece that you're going to mount up at the front dash and give you control over that epicenter effect. So keep in mind too that that knob that comes with this epicenter and any epicenter is essentially a effect control. So it is not a sub-level control, it's not a master volume, it is an epicenter effect. So how much of the epicenter effect do we want to apply is what that little knob's doing. So currently speaking, you would need to put in, your epicenter knob and the sub knob that came with your amplifier, if that's what you want in the vehicle. Now, one thing I did want to talk briefly about though, before we wrap things up, is something that some of you have maybe already seen, maybe some of you haven't seen, I don't know. But that is the new Epicenter Micro. So the Epicenter Micro is another piece that we have coming really, really soon, right on the kind of coattails of the Epicenter limited edition is going to be the new Epicenter Micro. And one of the cool things on the Micro that is going to come with it, and some of you are already looking at it on your screen, is the ACR4. The ACR4 is a dual concentric knob. So for those of you that don't like putting in a epicenter control knob and a sub control knob, the ACR4 is going to do both. So you'll have an outer ring for epicenter control and an inner knob for sub level. So you'll have one piece to put in that'll do both. Now, I also mentioned earlier that, back in the day, we used to use the Epicenter Plus when we were doing some OEM integration because it had high level inputs. We also talked about earlier that a lot of these newer cars are coming with a permanent high pass filter. So what are you going to do with those cars? You're going to need an LOC to get that high level signal in and convert it to RCA. And then you're going to need an epicenter as well, right? So if you're doing that car today, if you're doing another 18 Accord or a Range Rover or whatever vehicle, you would need an LC2i or LC1i or LC2i Pro and an epicenter. Okay, so that would be basically the solution is probably, LC1i and an epicenter would be a great solution for those. It'll work fantastic. It'll do everything that you need it to do in that Accord or that Jaguar, Land Rover, Range Rover, whatever you're working on. However, in the near future, we will have the ability to use a Epicenter Micro. And the Epicenter Micro is in between the size of an LC1i and a 2i Pro. So it's in between the size of these two guys right here. So physically, it is a very small product, okay? Now with an Epicenter Micro, one of the cool things with that is that this has your high level input. This has epicenter. This has your load generating switches in there. So all of your LGDs that are on that shelf right there, those are all built in. Basically everything that you need to do a subsystem in those vehicles is there. So I just wanted to kind of tease that, do a little sneak peek on that one. We'll do a whole training on just the Epicenter Micro in the near future as well, maybe next month or in November, something like that. But basically what you're going to have in the future, guys, is you're going to need to look at the vehicle when you're adding bass to an OEM system, and you're going to say, okay, does this car have bass roll off or bass plateau? And if the answer is yes, then you're going to go to a LC2i or 2i Pro. If the vehicle doesn't, if the vehicle has a permanent bass roll off, you bust out your maybe DMRTA and do a little bit of testing and find out that this vehicle has a permanent bass roll off at all volumes, you're going to go to an Epicenter Micro. So having those two pieces on your shelves are going to be a home run as far as OEM add-on bass packages are concerned. So anything you want to touch on the Micro before we wrap up, Chris?
No, I just think it's super cool that AudioControl for integration is giving more and more tools and really setting the standard for what's necessary and doing, bass or adding to late model vehicles.
Absolutely.
We now have, from the LC1i to the LC2i, LC2i Pro, Epicenter Micro, LC6i, LC7i, LC8i. So, I mean, any variation out there for whatever kind of car. I love the new products that are doing wonders out there where it doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you're working on. The Epicenter Micro is one of those new products. And all of our amplifiers are part of that new product lineup that really say, hey guys, it doesn't matter. You can have a factory system. You can have a weak factory system, you can have a premium sound system, like say for instance, a base model Bose and a Chevy. You can have the ultra premium, so like the higher end stuff, and it doesn't matter what you have there, a product and all the new products in the last few years will work. So it doesn't matter, factory amplified, aftermarket. And the Epicenter Micro is another continuation of that new product range, where you're combining all the best technology available for you guys to do systems today. And you know, the Epicenter Micro is just the evolution of building products that make sense, where there is one SKU, it can do a whole bunch of different things, and you're going to have that same legacy and that same frequency response and the same awesomeness that you've all come to enjoy and like from AudioControl.
Yeah, absolutely agree. The Epicenter Micro is going to be huge for the Epicenter family of products, and I think that's going to be really important, you know, here in the coming years, as to what we see in factory vehicles with OEM sound systems and these things, and what we're going to need to integrate with those. I think that Epicenter Micro is going to be absolutely key to have in stores and as a retailer have on your shelf and be ready to go for some of those vehicles that may catch you by surprise, you know?
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it's going to become more prevalent. I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's going to get worse in that regard, where we're going to see more and more cars with a permanent high pass. So
I also think that, you know, the one community that I'll reach out to, not that, you know, I don't know how many will actually talk or discuss AudioControl when it comes to the SPL guys. You know, even in the SPL world, there is like such a huge difference amongst, you know, SQL and just burping and the guys who want to play, you know, sub 20 hertz. I mean, there's so many different categories, and there's not a whole lot of cars that kind of bridge all those gaps. And one of the things that we've really focused on is making sure that we have products that are going to help. It doesn't matter, even in SPL, which category you fall into. And the Epicenter Micro is one of those products, because you can literally bypass the PFM. So there is no subsonic on it at all. And, you know, really play down to those deep, deep, deep frequencies and still have a crazy, ridiculous amount of signal for your, you know, 3 10,000 watt amplifiers or whatever it is, you know. So that's another area that we're trying to look at the products and make sure that the customer, the AudioControl customer from A to Z, whether they're bass head, sound quality purist, whatever, we have a product that's going to work for you and continue that whole good sound great. You know, even in the SPO world, you know, we wanted to have products that could make those great, you know, those good SPL systems great. And some of these products will even help you guys out there, and still rely on, you know, what we do in amplification and everything else for more of the purists, more of the guys who really care about the sound quality and the attributes of the sound that come out of our products.
Yep, I agree. So with that, guys, that pretty much wraps up the training for today. Thank you guys for joining us. And if you were excited by that Epicenter Micro, keep in touch, and, you know, kind of stay tuned to our Facebook and Instagram. We will announce another training next month. We do these once a month, called our monthly web training or live trainings. And maybe one of these future months, we'll do the Epicenter Micro as a topic. So keep an eye out for these Epicenter limited editions to hit your store if you're a dealer, or a retailer near you if you're a consumer watching this. And I look forward to seeing some pictures of these in some cool installs and stuff like that. So anyway, thanks again for joining us, guys. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.